Once again, really excited to be at Michigan Python, talking to all of you about kind of my experience. Today, I'm going to be doing something a little less Python-y because I'm not talking about code, but I think it should be fun. So I want to share my journey from a community contributor to leading major open source projects professionally at Anaconda, and I'll walk through some of the real steps I took in those kind of first months creating our OSS, our open source strategy, establishing project standards, and navigating the balance between community and the corporate priorities. Since every company is going to be different, this is just my experience. It's not necessarily a blueprint for success, but I thought I'd share my experience and some lessons learned and a few practical insights that helped me along the way as I was getting started. And I'll also share, yeah, this is so cool getting to work on open source professionally, but also kind of share if I had, honestly recommend someone else to follow this path as well. A little bit about me. I've been helping to lead Michigan Python for the last 6 or 7 years, which has been really fun, and I really enjoy hanging out with the community here. I spent years contributing to open source projects in that same time period, literally nights and weekends, because I was working for Ford. I had a job where I wasn't writing software all day. And I remember the moment it hit me as starting this new job that professional open source would be different. In my first week, looking at my calendar, filled with training and meetings and watching GitHub notifications start to stream in from all the open source work we were doing. So now I lead teams working on major projects, including Beware, which is Python on mobile, PyScript, which is Python in the browser, Jupyter, which is the notebook community, and tools like FSpec, which are for streaming data in the browser. And my background's also very diverse. As I mentioned, prior to Anaconda, I worked for Ford at functional safety, and I was a naval officer before that. And I think this diverse background also gives me a unique perspective on structure and leadership and community. And the skills from those previous roles also, things like project management and team leadership and strategic thinking have been surprisingly relevant in open source world as well. Okay, so my first realization, the scale is completely different from community contributions. What's kind of interesting is each project has its own community, including history and technical considerations. And the notification volume can be overwhelming for all those communities. So a lot of that comes from GitHub, from all the stuff going on of issues and pull requests and stuff. But also each community has its own chat platform. So Michigan Python uses Discord, and so does Beware and PyScript. And then Jupyter uses another platform called Zulip. Some of the communities I was already involved in, like the GNOME community, uses Matrix, and Anaconda uses Slack internally. So there's like so many chat platforms open all at once with different discussions going on. And this platform diversity added complexity as, each community kind of has its own preferences of communications. And as a new employee, getting up to speed at Anaconda, I first prioritized getting all my training done. And then I immediately focused on building an intentional network. And that was really important because Anaconda is like a remote company. And so like you show up and you don't know anyone and you need to kind of like build those relationships. So when I met with people, I would always ask them like, who else should I talk to? And then I'd go meet with those people and try to like build out who I do at the company. And this networking approach really helped me understand who the organization was and build relationships and also identify potential allies in the company that I could work with. And I think these networks are just as important of like the technical aspects of the projects we're working on for sure. So a typical day for me involves balancing internal company tasks with external community work. So internal tasks are things like setting objectives and key results with my team or having one-on-ones and coordination and staff meetings. But then external community thing is also going on. So we have like triage and coordination meetings for Jupyter and PyScript. There's pull request reviews. We're trying to work on individual contributions, chatting with other people in the community and helping. The way I deal with all these competing priorities is I like to use like a getting things done like framework, which is pretty much just like categorizing tasks and have like a list of like next up things I need to work on. That helps me stay organized and really like process the various inputs I am receiving and stay on top of all the commitments from all these like different projects and communities. But the biggest challenge was finding time to work on, I guess, time for that proactive work that you need to do when there's kind of like this constant stream of reactive needs coming in as well. I mean, just kind of like imagine juggling multiple conversations across all these different platforms while trying to maintain some type of like strategic focus. That's kind of the daily reality. Okay, so I'm up to speed at Anaconda now. My first major initiative is developing a clear OSS strategy um, document for Anaconda. Before I joined, Stan Siebert is a longtime open source manager at Anaconda. He's been there from like almost the beginning, and um, I helped out by polishing an initial version of like an open source strategy that he had already developed and helped gather feedback from a wider group of stakeholders at the company. And that was kind of my way of helping out and getting involved in that. And a director noted this finally helps me understand how open source investments connect to our business goals. And I think that collaborative approach while working with Stan really improved the strategy while respecting the work that he had already done on it. And we organized it into these three main sections. So there's a business section, which talked about how open source supports Anaconda's goals and mission. There's a technical aspect, which talks about like engineering approaches we take and how we make technical decisions. And there was also a community section, which is probably the most important. And that's like how we engage with the communities and support open source where we operate. So this was really important because instead of using it just to like prioritize projects, I use the strategy document to then be like a foundation for how we create objectives and key results with my team, like how we find cross-functional collaboration activities. And I'll talk more about those both like inside and outside the company, and also a platform that allows us to evolve the strategy in the future. It really provided like this clear documentation that could be then like built upon in the future and adopted over time. In other words, it helped communicate our intentions internally for how we're going to do open source and really set this foundation for us being able to prioritize our work going forward. All right, so our second major initiative was establishing baseline standards across our projects. So we created a checklist of minimum requirements, which focused on three main areas. Community guidelines. So this is things like code of conduct and contributing guides, how we want people to engage with us. Security, which is very important. So this is things like setting up, Xander just talked about CI/CD pipelines, and there's ways you can set up things like Dependabots and Renovate and other things like that that automatically update your dependencies and keep them up to date. And then they'll submit a pull request, which goes through a CI/CD pipeline and make sure your software didn't break when you got your new version of a dependency. And also set up automated releases so that when we release a new version, it goes through that whole pipeline that Xander just talked about and automatically creates a release in PyPI or Anaconda or wherever we're publishing our packages to. And the third thing is project sponsorship recognition. This is about clearly acknowledging Anaconda support. And each project had different gaps to fill. So example here on the slide, the Beware project needed to improve their project sponsorship recognition to properly acknowledge Anaconda's support. And that's now fixed. And here we can see that proper recognition on the slide. And it actually both benefits Anaconda and the project itself, showing like who's involved and how are they contributing. Another example, FSspec, which was one of the top 20 downloaded Python projects, and it's used for streaming data. Like for example, if you open a pandas data frame off data in S3 bucket, it's using FSspec to stream the data into pandas. And it is a stadium project. And what I mean by that, it's like one maintainer, Martin Durant, is working on this project and he does most of the contributions. And then there's like these millions of people using the project, right? And it had no community guidelines. And this is still like a work in progress. We still need to work on that because it would be good to get more people involved in the project. So we implement these standards incrementally, focusing on highest impact items first. Some other areas where we also need to add more structure, including like kind of these, I feel like standard operating modes of like setting, I mentioned a few times already, but objectives and key results of my team. This allows us to focus on balancing cross-functional product goals that Anaconda has to like deliver products to customers with our community standards and improvement. And that framework then helps us measure progress and see how we're doing. For example, this led us to explore something called CHAOS, which stands for Community Health Analytics Open Source Software. I know that's kind of a large acronym. And there it's like a community of people who are interested in metrics and open source. And these CHAOS metrics gave us standardized ways to evaluate community health beyond just counting issues and pull requests or something like that. And although the metrics are still a work in progress, because that's like an ongoing, I feel like, journey we're on for metrics, it is starting to help create more consistency while respecting each project's kind of unique identity. All right. So our third initiative that I took on was finding internal opportunities. And this is about maintaining enhanced open source visibility. What I mean by that, even with like a company that has people working on open source full time, it can sometimes be not as visible when there's other like product work going on. So one way I do that is we have a Slack channel called High Fives, which I think is just cool anyway, where people can post like to the whole company, hey, high five to this, these people, they did something really great. And so I've gotten the practice of, and I'm giving Nicholas Stolvey here high fives for releasing the first PyScript newsletter. And he's on the PyScript team. And these regular updates keep our work visible and celebrate successes the open source teams are doing in a kind of format the whole company can see. I also worked with product teams to integrate OSS considerations into planning processes. And one success story is there. In order to improve the internal visibility, once again, I examined the company's product roadmap on like what were the top priorities that we had to deliver for our platform and for the other products that we have, and worked directly then with the product managers and talked to them about how we as an open source team could get involved and support those priorities that the company have so that we could contribute to those goals through cross-functional projects or working on some of the products upstream. And this really created these like cross-functional collaboration opportunities that we didn't seem to have before between our open source team, other open source teams at the company, and the kind of engineering and product teams across Anaconda. And Anaconda is fundamentally like built on open source. So it wasn't like shift conversations, but to keep open source like on everyone's mind. This collaborative approach really helps ensure open source remains this central part of the company thinking and planning. One thing I'd like to do in the future as well is to expand educational resources to help as someone new to open source or joining the company can get up to speed on like why is open source important and how do I contribute to it. And then also we used to be very active in something called a FOSS Friday, Free and Open Source Fridays, where employees who aren't on the open source team have like dedicated time where they can contribute to open source projects. And I'd like to reinvigorate that in the future and make that more like sprint based or coding dojos and work together on projects. The greatest ongoing challenge is really balancing this community and corporate perspectives. And I talked about some of those cross-functional things, but I really like in my role serve to translate those two different worlds daily. And so that requires a lot of balance. Many community members on open source projects are volunteers. I even said like many of mine were like nights and weekends, right? You're just say, hey, this interests me. I'm going to try to get involved, or I'm doing this drive-by contribution of something I saw that need to be fixed. And many of the other people are as well. So they have different motivations and time frames on when they can contribute to things. And the corporate stakeholders have business needs and deadlines and yeah, objectives that have to be met and stuff like that, right? And so to truly understand these open source communities, I made contributions to them myself. And I found those ideas by actually using the projects, PyScript and Beware and the other ones, and fixing problems that made getting started difficult. I think this hands-on approach gave me some credibility while yeah, joining the community, as well as gave me some practical insights into like user experience issues and how the projects could be better. I've also given talks here at Michigan Python on Beware and PyScript. And so I think that's a fun way to learn about the projects as well. And also I use them. Anaconda didn't have a take a child to work day, and now they do because I started that in Anaconda, and I use those projects with the kids on some of the exercises they were doing. And so I could see some of like the how they were interacting and stuff with the software we were building, which was really fun as well. I think these like outreach type things really help bridge the community and introduce things to new audiences as well. One other example how we engage the community on these cross-functional projects I talked about when we're working our product is Anaconda has what's called the Anaconda distribution. So this is like you go to anaconda.com, you download Anaconda and install it on your computer, and it has Anaconda Navigator and comes with Jupyter and stuff. And it's the primary way where people interact with Anaconda's product is to download the distribution. Unfortunately, it has this Windows installer that's built on, I don't know if anyone remembers Winamp from the 90s, but the installer is called NSYS, and it was created originally for Winamp. So it's old school. It's still kicking because people are still using it for things, but it's kind of, I would say, this like legacy technology, and it's very difficult to understand the programming language, the custom like scripting language they're using. And Beware, I talked about, is mostly focused on deploying apps, Python on mobile. And part of it is also a library called Briefcase, which makes it easy to build installers because you need that for mobile platforms to build an installer to ship your app to an app store, but also for other platforms as well. So we're using Beware's Briefcase technology to try to modernize Anaconda's distribution installer, and that's improving one of our main products at the company while using our open source technology to do that. And that's kind of like those collaboration that I'm talking about where we can really like work with the product teams to help make use of that open source that we're working on. And we also balance internal discussions with the installers team and also posted public issues on GitHub because the Conda installer framework is called Constructor, and it has a community as well. So we wanted to engage with them and talk to them like, hey, what if we use Briefcase to build this installer? Some communities like PyScript and Jupyter, I mentioned, have weekly community calls, and they were established before I joined, and other communities don't. And actually that diversity in what the communities are doing is actually appropriate. So we need to tailor our approach to each community's needs. And they kind of have like a unique culture on how the community's formed and how they interact with each other. And this flexibility kind of recognizes that these different projects have, once again, different communication preferences, histories. I think the most important thing is having that transparent communication and being like honest and honest about our constraints of what we can help with and our priorities on what we were thinking about. I still participate, went to PyCon and here at Michigan Python and community events, and I love that. And I really think that's important for like engaging with the community and talking to people in person and stuff like that. So this balance is never perfect between this community and corporate balance, but the goal is finding kind of these win-win opportunities where we can contribute to like the company's products, and also continue to help and balance like the community's needs and help the communities continue to prosper as well. So let's start wrapping it up. What worked well as I've been on this journey? I think it was crucial having a documented strategy from the beginning, like how we're engaging with open source, setting minimum project standards, created these immediate improvement opportunities and consistency across the projects we're working on, while also being tailored to like each project's community. Finding internal champions was really important who understood the value of open source, and also establishing regular communication rhythms. Yeah, things like one-on-ones and meetings and how we're going to operate and make, yeah, even office hours where we meet with others at the company. Some things I wish I would have known. The emotional labor involved in bridging all these different communities is real. It's a lot. I would have also started to measure community metrics even earlier. We've started to collect metrics and graph them for how our projects are doing from GitHub, and we automated that and started to create dashboards. But I think we also lost the opportunity to start to see trends by not collecting the data earlier. And so like I would have tried to, even if it wasn't set up how I wanted, just like starting to collect data, I think is really good because then you can start seeing those trends earlier. I'm also still working on trying to learn how to scale my personal involvements effectively across all these different projects and community. I'm still trying to balance a lot of open source work is maintenance work of like updating dependencies and keeping the lights on, and trying to balance that with like innovation and like good ideas for new features. And I'm still navigating the tension between these kind of corporate roadmaps and what the communities need. So I've shared my journey from community contributor to professional open source leader. This transition kind of brings both structure and new challenges, but kind of once again, the key points to remember: build on existing foundations that existed before where possible, set kind of these baseline standards that everyone can start adopting across the communities, but respect the community's differences. Find opportunities for cross-functional collaboration across the company and across the communities you're operating, and maintain visibility through regular updates and celebrating successes. And once again, this balance is an ongoing process and a journey, not some like destination I'm ever going to arrive at. Despite all these things I've learned and all the work still to do, to serve the software engineers on my team, and continue to improve these open source projects and to strengthen these communities, working on open source as a professional job is a dream come true for me. And if this sounds fun to you, I would highly recommend doing a journey like this as well. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Looking ahead, I believe that this professional open source leadership will continue to evolve as more companies recognize kind of the strategic advantage and value of open source if done with authenticity and engaging with the communities. And I think the skills we're developing as OSS leaders today will shape how these open source communities and businesses intersect in the future. And I'm happy to answer any questions about my experience.
So what is the business imperative of open source software to Anaconda?
Yeah, so the question from Xander was, what's the business imperative open source software for Anaconda? So Anaconda started in this data science area, and they were doing like consulting work, and about 12 years ago, they started Conda. And the purpose of Conda was it is very hard with data science libraries that are not mostly pure Python. They're mostly built on top of C and C++ and Fortran and other like highly optimized compiled languages. It's very hard to get those packages built and especially put on operating systems like Windows in a consumable way. Like, hey, set up a Fortran tool chain to install this library. It's just not going to happen. So Conda was started as an open source project to make that easier. So they solve that by building recipes that take all the dependencies, all those packages, and bring them all together in recipes, and then build those data science libraries against those dependencies, and then ship them all so that it's easy for you to install, like with an installer or something. So that was like 12 years ago, and so the company was kind of built on this make it easier to do data science thing. And most of our customers are large IT departments of large companies, most of the Fortune 500 companies, and they also need an easy way for their employees to be able to use those same libraries. So if we continue to invest in Conda and other open source tools to um, expand the number of people using Python and the number of people using those data science tools and continue making it easier and faster and stuff like that, then Conda will continue having kind of this user base that's able to charge companies for the service of using their secure packages and their environments and their distribution.
Why not just sell it? Why do you have an open source side?
So the follow-up question was why not just sell it or why not just have the open source side? So I think the value that Conda as an open source project has created is there's so many projects or tutorials out there that say, hey, how do you install this library? Well, it's, hey, you install Conda and then Conda install X and you have the thing. And uh, that value that was created because it was a free open source thing that anyone could download and use, and then people used it for their projects and stuff like that. Um, and so I think the whole value of the company was really rooted in the fact that we created that thing that added all that value, right? So it doesn't make sense to like say, oh, Conda is not going to be open source. It's actually run by the Conda like a Conda governance team that expanded beyond Anaconda as well. So like there's like an open source community that governs the project even as well. So we're just like one of many community members. Some of the other projects we're working on, like Jupyter, Beware, PyScript, all these things we're working on. We know like when um, a user installs Anaconda, normally they like install it, and then the first thing is like, here, let me open my notebook. It's like the first link, right? So Jupyter is a open source project. There's a lot of other companies involved, AWS and Databricks and QuantSight and all these other companies that are also have engineers working on it full time with the idea of like, hey, if we keep on investing in Jupyter, we know that's like the main practitioner tool and continue to make it fast and reliable and add new features and stuff, then it'll continue being like a good experience for the all the people using it. And then those people will continue using our platform as well, right? So it's kind of like investing in the community in order to help Anaconda's customers as well.
Invest in the community, sell the infrastructure,
Uh,
depending.
yeah, invest in the community, sell the work we do into like the governance aspects of like a platform of like, hey, I want to know what CVEs there are, and I want to know who at my company is using what packages and like all that type of stuff that IT really cares about, but probably not. Yeah. None of us in this room of like a practitioner who just downloads Anaconda don't care about that, doesn't care about that at all. But like IT departments definitely care about, hey, do we have the latest versions? And like, is there vulnerabilities in them, and who is actually using it, and who are we paying for, and all that type of stuff that IT cares a lot about for compliance and regulatory requirements and all kinds of stuff, right? So,
Yeah, I have like two semi-unrelated questions. And one is like, how did like stuff like the XZ supply chain attack, did that decrease the appetite in commercial enterprise for open source in general, or did it just increase the appetite for like secure software supply chain like Anaconda?
so the question by the other Xander, so there's a library called XZ that's like a compression library, I think, and short story is the maintainer was um, overworked and was maintaining this highly used by millions and millions of people library. And someone showed up, was actually, it ended up being, I think, a state actor who slowly got involved, was fixing things, and then created like sock puppet accounts to put pressure on the one maintainer to say, oh, what's wrong with you? Can't you get stuff done faster? Like putting like almost bullying this maintainer. And then that put that maintainer in a place to be like, oh, forget this, and reached out to the person who is actually a state actor to give them rights to the library. And then that person embedded malicious software into the library, and someone like happened to at like a fluke detect it because something went a little slower or something. So like yeah, injected this very like complex thing into the software by getting trust in the community to get involved, right? And so the question was, hey, does this reduce the use of open source software or maybe puts more focus on security? I think I don't see any like decrease in open source software. It's like it is taken over, and I feel like most companies that write software get immense value out of not having to build it all themselves. But I think it has shown, I think these examples shine a light a little bit of like, man, there is risk here, and we need a safer supply chain for our software and maybe more sustainable open source than having one maintainer maintain everything by themselves with not getting paid for it and stuff like that. So I think I think there continues to be more and more focus on software security and supply chain and stuff like that. So I think that's continuing to increase, and I think tools that help companies reduce risk like that are continuing to be popular. Unfortunately, I don't think we've done too much on the flip side of like helping. Yeah, that one. Yeah, there's an XCD comic of like the one developer in some state who's holding up the whole software supply chain by themselves or something, right? I don't think we've probably done enough to fix that part, but there's lots of work to do there, I think. Yeah.
A related question. When you're a company with an open source project, how do you manage external contributions in a way that both respects the volunteer, but also manages these kinds of security and supply chain concerns and your own strategy? Like HashiCorp was famous for just sitting on complex, detailed feature PRs because it didn't fit their roadmap. How do you handle it?
Yeah, so the question, sorry, what was your name?
How do you handle like community contributions?
Yeah.
While respecting your own strategy and obligations?
So to repeat the question for everyone online, the question's about how do we manage accepting community contributions while still, I guess, continuing to deliver on like the corporate needs for the open source project. I think we're in like, it can be tricky a little bit, but I think that's why it's like, I think some companies do this by, hey, our thing is open source, but really we're doing all the work on it. And there's not really a community there. It's just like, it's an open source thing that's available.
It's like source available.
Yeah, it's like it's source available. There's not really like a community there. And I think you gave an example of HashiCorp or lots of companies that like make their source available, but like there's not, some of them don't even like allow you to make a contribution. It's like the source exists, you can look at it, but like if you want to change something, it's never going to get accepted upstream.
Yeah.
So I think that was one of the things that I talked about where I think it's so important that we build communities, because open source is not like just making the source code available. It's about like who we're interacting with, creating these communities. We working on open source at Anaconda are just one member of that community. We don't get to like dictate what the project does, but that's where we need to like engage with them and talk to them openly about, hey, these are our priorities right now. What do you guys think? What do you guys think we should be working on? Or what do you think the community should be working on as a whole and stuff like that? It is that's like our approach, and I think it's the right approach. But there's other companies that have decided to, maybe more like a closed source available, but like a closed system where they need to control all their contributions and their product and stuff. So I think I understand maybe why they do that as well, because once again, they have corporate needs and deadlines and all that type of stuff. But I think you can get a lot more value out of those open source relationships if you're like building a community around it and working on stuff that way.
What does it look like? Say you have two teams that both want something in Jupyter from different companies, so they put resources in at the same time in a different direction. When does that governance conversation happen, and what does that look like?
Yeah, so the question was for Jupyter, if two companies are trying to like work on the same thing at the same time or have different, maybe trying to go in different directions. So there, for most of those like large projects, Conda, Jupyter, they have like a governance process. So if you want to make a large change, like I want to I don't know what a good example is, but I want to like, and Python does that as well. Like it's called a PEP, or for Conda, it's called a SEP, or for Jupyter, it's called a JEP. And that stands for enhancement proposal. So you would actually like write up, like, I want to add template strings to Python, and it would be this awesome feature for these reasons, and these are the things we considered, and all that type of thing. And then you have to spend a lot of effort with the community debating it, discussing it, talking about other things. So that's work, right? You have to engage with the community and talk about it because it's not just like, oh, I'm going to go implement this. Those are for major changes. To be honest, most of the work in open source is not those like huge governance requiring changes. It's like, if you can imagine 5 engineers from 5 companies just like with issues streaming in, trying to keep up, fixing bugs, keeping the lights on. I would say most of the work looks more like that rather than like, oh, hey, 2 companies are coming in with their own ideas and want to kind of like disrupt the project or something like that. I think that's probably more of a very like unique situation. And if there was something that was like large changes they want to make, then they would use those governance processes.
Yeah. So it's like very rarely an actual problem that a commercial client wants one thing, but the source community wants to go the other direction. It just doesn't really happen.
Yeah, so the statement in the room is like, hey, that probably doesn't happen that often. I agree with that. It's also like, if you're authentically engaging with the community, I'm not there to make Anaconda succeed. I'm literally like authentically want the community to succeed. So it wouldn't make much sense for me to like, I don't know, go try to have like a battle with people from AWS or whatever company and try to like get our thing in over them, because that wouldn't serve the community. So, but that's like that's the community work and the interactions and the trust building and the, hey, you don't necessarily feel like I'm doing this for my company. I'm doing it for like the community, and we're working together as a team, like that community is, right? So, but once again, there's a lot of communities involved in, so it's a lot to engage with all those teams and stuff, but it's fun. Any questions online, anyone?
I have a question, Dan.
Yes.
I'm guessing you used to do a lot more hands-on coding, and this new role at Anaconda is not that way at all. So, have you kind of gotten a feel of how your supervisor is going to do performance review? How are you being measured?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So it was about my balance of work. So my previous job, functional safety, I was leading like a global 100 engineer team. And I was like a manager of managers. And uh, I was involved in some like systems engineering, but I didn't get to write like much code or do very many individual contributions. And that was like the role I needed to play. Now I directly manage this team of open source software engineers. Um, an example, I mentioned these cross-functional projects. So in the Jupyter ecosystem, there's a extension for Jupyter called Gator that was originally created in Anaconda, and then the Mamba organization took it over and renamed it and stuff like that. But it's for like managing your Conda projects or your packages and environments from in Jupyter. And it had been not updated in 3 years. And Jupyter Lab had gone through major changes. So it's like, not only had it been updated, it's like really a lot of work to update it. And one of the engineers in my team decided to leave the company, and we talked to the product team and said, we're going to revive this extension for Jupyter because we think it's really important for people to like manage their packages with Jupyter. And we needed to do it in the quarter because we told them we were going to do that. So me and the engineer on my team, Rosio Reyes, works on Jupyter, and we got behind schedule because a person left. So I spent a lot of this quarter hands-on programming, updating Python, JavaScript dependencies, and upgrading this extension to work. And it was a lot. It was a lot of work. It was very challenging. So I spend a lot more of my. I still have a lot of work to do. Of course, I talked about product stuff and talking to those people and doing team meetings and one-on-ones. I have to spend time on that, but I also get to split my time doing individual contributions and helping review PRs and write code myself and stuff like that. And in previous roles, I didn't really get to do that as much. So I actually am able to keep a good split of that right now, which is what I'd prefer.